If there's no linear way from A to B when we talk about self-realization or reshuffling of identity, as you said, I wonder about the value of personal effort in a way that is self-realization rather an act of mercy, or is there something we can do in the sense of a spiritual practice? Because what I experience is either I do it right and it builds up spiritual ego, or I do it wrong and it builds up fear. So I really wonder about the role of personal effort for inner work.
It's funny because I don't know if those of you who were at the retreat, if you hear how closely this resembles what we talked just today. Huh? It's exactly that. Exactly that. This is also that centuries old or millennia old perspective which is encapsulated in the principles of karma yoga, which essentially, according to the Hindu lore, according to Hindu scriptures, where all yogas proceed from, in a way. Yes, there is if we are to stick with the Bhagavad Gita, it starts with the yoga of despondency of Arjuna. In other words, despondency is already seen as unfoldment of yoga. There is an act of despondency. One needs to be in an attitude of despondency. Because if one is in an attitude of, I know it all and I know how it is, that arrogance, it's opposite to the despondency. With the act of despondency, there is a possibility for something to begin to unfold. So the teaching unfolds from there. But the first yoga taught is the yoga of action in freedom from the binding influence of karma. And action in freedom from the binding influences of one's authorship over one's actions is that, what karma yoga in essence. It's not how it is often I've heard being taught when I was young and when I was would spend time in the ashrams, and just doing something as a selfless service. It's a surface level of affairs. The selfless service here means an action performed without an attitude of a doer, where even the fruits of actions are assigned to at least to that which essentially is the mover and shaker when it comes to the affairs of nature. It's these qualities of prakriti, right? The gunas, all three of them, which incessant activity of the forces, what gives us all this, what we experience. So the exposition of the karma yoga is there, that all these actions are in any case performed by the gunas of nature. The wise understands that even in all the bodily activity, as closing and opening one's eyes, one does not act at all. And so it goes. So that prerequisite is a primordial prerequisite of all spiritual aspirants, because one needs to remove oneself from the picture first. But then, as an opposite to that, to apply full spectrum of responsibilities when it comes to working on this, what's simply called tendencies, witnessing how reactive modes arise, how and what essentially stands on the way of seeing things how they are for what they are. It's that churning also, it's like churning, separating, like beating the cream into a butter. So to separate that substance which will become the butter, that which is a liquid. This is the first process, this separation, so that the self can be separated from the field of action. The Karma Yoga is understood here as separating the self, the aim of Karma Yoga, the self from the field of activity, from the field of action. It's developing that state of a witness, which is an, I would say, indispensable platform for all spiritual work to unfold. Because if there is no witness, one would be like merry-go-round. It's a very, very daunting affair when there is not enough witnessing. And witnessing is very different when spoken from this perspective, how it is often spoken of in New Age, in that kind of semi-Buddhist attitude of mindfulness. I call it tiptoeing. You know, when we want to look taller or feel taller or have elevated perspective, we walk on our tip of the toes. How long can we do that? We eventually feel very tired and, you know, go on a full feet, and sometimes even further down. Witnessing here is a byproduct of separation of the self from the field of activity. Is an outcome, and it is a spontaneous outcome, just as it is a spontaneous phenomenon. But that does not exclude the necessity of that what your question contains. Where is the place of self-effort comes? So in a way, with this given, another analogy can be given. The self-effort here, it's like literally exemplified by that fairy tale that I sometimes retell. When the Baron Münchhausen drowns in the mire on top of his horse. It's a character, right? So he suddenly realizes, wait a minute, I'm on a horse and I'm now drowning in the mire. So, of course, being Baron Münchhausen, he quickly figures out that it's time I do something about it. And so he grabs himself by his mustache, holds his hat in another hand, props himself so that he can also save the horse, and lifts himself out of the mire. This is the place of self-effort. So if you can analyze that, scrutinize it, you can see that that's pretty much everything. Because everything is self. Whenever we speak about this, there's always this inevitability of self. Just as all the calamities are self-imposed, just as every contraction is a self-imposed one, that is removed by self-effort. But if that self-effort is not accompanied by the principles encapsulated in the foundational grounds of all science of union, then we are on a shaky grounds, because that what can inflame, just as this genuine spiritual aspirant is working on herself or himself. There is an era of propping up that what needs to be eventually knocked down. And New Age spirituality, including a lot of teachings out there, it's nothing other than continuous attempts at re-evaluating that egoic structure. It's trying to find sneaky solutions to make this life better. It's an attempt to constantly improve something in this condition, which, if one is smart enough, already sees that it's pretty much you can finish it, right? Like
spiritual ego.
Yeah. What can we call it? It's this realization that everyone is pretty much fucked without using any inappropriate language is what make one grow outside of these adolescent tendencies to bring some kind of improvement to a pathology. Healing of consciousness is required. Pathology cannot be improved. The neurotic state is characterized by being neurotic. How can that be made better? So these are just two sides, you see, of that coin. And I'm not even in the picture. It's doing itself. This requires, I would say, it requires some degree of maturity, some degree of emotional, psychological, and mental maturity. Because we can easily slip into various tendencies. How it will fit that agenda which aches to stay and lurk beneath the ground. I don't know, like if you feel like giving it another shot or just
sneaky solutions, I like that. I'll just give you a short quote. I quoted in one of my books. Someone asked the Zen master, is meditation necessary for, the path of self-realization? And there was a moment of silence. And then he said, no, but it improves the probability. So this answer is, is not as simple as it seems. But I can just tell you that I was, for some years in the 90s, involved in this so-called, satsang movement. Actually, I was involved in initiating it. Not wanting to do this, but it just happened this way. I never was sharing this movement really, but I watched many so-called neo-Advaitic people coming back from India. And with what I call a concept of conceptlessness. And in this concept of conceptlessness, any kind of effort was unnecessary. So, why make an effort if there is nobody to make an effort? Or why make an effort if, enlightenment is what is anyway? So why make an effort? So if you follow this chain of thoughts, this is what I mean by, this is the concept of conceptlessness. And this is why this whole satsang wave had to collapse. It lasted, I don't know how long it lasted in the States, but here in Europe, it lasted for maybe 10, 15 years. There's still a little bit, but it's gone. Because there is a great disillusionment about the Advaita teaching. At first it was a great promise for everybody, no effort needed. Absolutely no effort. Just relax, lean back, and realize you are the self. So, as Igor also said, why are we sitting here? Teachers are unnecessary. From an absolute point of view, everything is unnecessary. But the Advaitic teaching of self-inquiry teaches that you have to inquire from where you are right now. You cannot inquire from a place of understanding which is spiritually correct, but not my experience of this moment. So this is the teaching of self-inquiry. And this is also inner science. And from there, it seems that a conscious effort is needed until it transforms by itself in effortlessness. If we start with effortlessness, this is only concealed inertia of mind.
Yeah, it's very important. Very important aspect that Neo-Advaita overlooked is the misunderstanding of this mechanics. That tamaguna is the predominant quality, the inertia, the quality of inertia, the quality of the mind, the actual natural state of mind is sattva. This is natural state of what mind in itself, in a quiescent state, is. But agitated, sattva is that equanimity, that perfect repose, balance, and luminosity. It does not abstract awareness in any way. It cannot. But agitated or when it becomes so inert that all there is this very, very cohesive, very dense identification. In fact, the identification with the body is a chief property of when tamaguna dominates the mind, which when it's transcended, it and gives way to a different attitude. It's more, in certain stages, it's more like I dwell in the body. It's a kind of like this seamless relationship. But one is not feel heaviness from that condition. And in the satsang movement, what was so peculiar is that, and the popularity of satsang movement also is very cultural phenomenon as well, because it's the teachings taken outside of one context and placed in a very different context, in the context of instantaneous culture which craves immediate gratification of anything that it desires in the moment. So of course, so many people flock to the satsang movement because it promised this quick solution. It's very, very much of that. It catered for that kind of audience, which very much perpetuates in a way and doesn't allow any going deeper.
Culture of impatience and in instant enlightenment.